Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Elizabeth Taylor's granddaughter and Ambassador for the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation, Naomi Wilding.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Hello, Linda Gale and Peter. What an incredible week, and congratulations. I'm Naomi Wilding, an ambassador for the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation. Sorry, there's a problem with the teleprompter. Hi. We'll just wait a minute while they fix it. We've got a phone number. It has been such an honor to be here with you in Amsterdam this week. The number of activists, policymakers, researchers, and health professionals who have come together is a testament to you. A testament that we are not giving up in our fight against AIDS. Still having issues. So sorry. Can we fix it? Hi. You got a written version? Thank you so much. Where do we get? You are warriors in this fight, and so is your next speaker. I'm so excited to have this opportunity to introduce Congresswoman Barbara Lee. Like my grandmother, Elizabeth Taylor, Congresswoman Lee has been on the forefront of the global AIDS response for decades. As a member of the United States House of Representatives, Congresswoman Lee represents Oakland and communities in the East Bay. I live in California and have had the opportunity to work with Congresswoman Lee. She is truly a friend of the community and always willing to jump in when asked. When I hosted a gathering to educate our community about how discriminating, stigmatizing, unscientific, and problematic HIV criminalization laws are, Congresswoman Lee came to Los Angeles to speak at the event. As a leader in government, Congresswoman Lee has built her career around standing up for the powerless. Like many of you in the room, she fought for research to understand what was happening at the beginning of the pandemic and fought for housing and medical care for those affected by HIV and AIDS. Since entering government, Congresswoman Lee has authored or co-authored every major piece of US HIV and AIDS legislation. That includes the legislation that created PEPFAR and established the Global Fund for HIV, TB, and malaria. She is the former chair of the U.S. Congressional Black Caucus, co-founder and co-chair of the Congressional HIV and AIDS Caucus, and a founding member of the Congressional LGBT Equality Caucus. She is a stalwart defender of the rights of women and girls and a champion of health care for all. We were so proud to give Congresswoman Lee the Elizabeth Taylor Legislative Leadership Award in 2016 for her work on comprehensive sexual health education in the US. We need more champions for comprehensive sexual health education in all countries, including the US, if we truly want to prevent new infections. I know the Congresswoman will not rest until the progress we have made applies to everyone, across the country and across the globe. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Congresswoman Barbara Lee.
Well, first, let me thank Naomi for that very spirited and kind introduction, Naomi. But also, I just want to thank you for your work in carrying on your grandmother's incredible legacy. Give Naomi and the Elizabeth Taylor Foundation a round of applause. They're still on the front lines doing all of the great work. And good afternoon to all of you. Let me first say how honored I am to join you on the final day of the 2018 International AIDS Conference. I want to congratulate the conference organizers, the City of Amsterdam, and the thousands of researchers, activists, all of you. What a successful and illuminating conference. Now, since becoming a member of the United States Congress, as, Naomi mentioned all of the legislation, but I've actually attended nearly every AIDS conference around the world. And let me tell you, I get my inspiration and insights from you. I go back to Washington, D.C. I try to use what I learned from these conferences and from you, and I really thank you very much for that. Give yourselves a round of applause because you are informing myself and members of my Congress on where we need to go and what we need to do. Let me tell you, the conference always lives up to this year's theme of breaking barriers and building bridges. Now, before I begin, I want to address something, and you know what it is. I know there are many people in our community, and especially here in this room, who have concerns about the 2020 conference taking place in the United States. And I'm here to say, though, let me just say, I hear you. I'm fighting every day against a xenophobic, bigoted, and reactionary agenda. I do this every day. Every day. Every day. As an African American woman and someone who has spent my life fighting for the unheard and underrepresented, I will continue to resist all policies that demonize and discriminate against our sisters and brothers. And that includes, yes, transgender and all LGBTQ people. That includes sex workers. That includes people who use drugs. And that includes immigrants and refugees. Everyone who's been shut out. In fact, recently I voted against it. This was a very terrible bill, but it was recent. SESTA. You may know about this bill that really puts our sex workers at risk. And let me tell you, I was really shocked, one of a very small group of members of Congress who voted for it. Against it. But let me tell you one thing, that told me that we still have a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do. But I truly believe that we cannot end AIDS unless everyone is at the table. Everyone. Now, I became involved, everyone, in this movement in the late 1980s. That was really a turning point for the epidemic. And today we are at another turning point. Now, my community of Oakland, California, has been struggling. Anybody here from the 13th Congressional District? Hey, Oakland's in the house. Berkeley. We've been in the struggle fighting against AIDS for many years. And because of racial and economic disparities in my community and throughout the United States, all too often, people of color have not been at the table. If we fail to address the inequalities within our communities, this turning point in our struggle to end AIDS will become a missed opportunity. And I have seen the consequences of failure, of complacency, of silence. And I will not be silent like you are not silent, as my sisters and brothers die because of inaction and inequality. Now, I want to just briefly share some history of where we've come so that we can break down the remaining barriers that persist. My first AIDS conference was in Durban, South Africa in 2000. We went into Durban knowing full well that the South African government was in denial that HIV even caused AIDS. Yet we did not shy away from that fight. That year we marched in the streets. We wore yellow t-shirts that said HIV positive, and we were shouting to break the silence. When our beloved warrior, President Nelson Mandela, delivered his closing remarks at the conference, only 50,000 people worldwide were on treatment. We were on the front lines of a terrifying, growing epidemic. And we knew we needed to do something dramatic to change the tide. But the crisis wasn't for us as Americans just across the ocean. Back in my congressional district in California in 1998, mind you, we declared a state of emergency in Alameda County. We were beginning to see the disproportionate impacts of HIV on communities of color. The rate of infection among African Americans in Alameda County had grown to 5 times that of white people. The disparities were evident, and they were tearing my community, like many communities around the country, apart. This epidemic at home in the United States and abroad drove my work on programs like PEPFAR and the Global Fund, and the Minority AIDS Initiative, and the Ryan White Program. And I'm proud to have collaborated with many of you, and also with Republicans, which is the opposition party for me. I'm a Democrat. We had to work together. We had to work together in spite of our differences to pass this critical piece of legislation, or these critical pieces of legislation. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that these initiatives, while not perfect, have saved many, many lives. Where are we today? Stigma, discrimination, and inequality. And yes, my sisters and brothers, we have come a long way, but if you look a bit closer, you can also see us losing ground. Now is not the time to back down. Now is not the time to be complacent. No, not now. Now is not the time to allow division to tear us apart. Not now. Stigma, discrimination, and inequality are holding us back. What's more, laws, policies, and political rhetoric allow these barriers to remain in place. There are huge gaps in treatment, prevention, and care between low-income and wealthy countries. And these disparities also exist within the same countries. Some populations have the best treatment and prevention at their fingertips. Other communities are falling through the cracks. And all too often, especially in my home country, the quality of treatment and care is determined by the color of your skin, or the dollars in your bank account, or the zip code where you live. In the United States, people of color bear a disproportionate burden of the new HIV cases, especially in the southern part of the United States. Trans women, sex workers, people who inject drugs all too often fall victim to discriminatory laws and policies that endanger their well-being. Julian Bond, the late great civil rights leader, once said, HIV and AIDS is a major civil rights issue of our time. He was right. He knew that without tackling the underlying structural issues of poverty and racism, that we cannot accomplish the goal of an AIDS-free generation. Julian Bond encouraged us to make AIDS political because it requires political will and change in policy to empower marginalized communities. And you'll recall that the AIDS conference was unable to return to the United States for many years because of the discriminatory HIV travel ban. I worked with Democrats and Republicans to lift that ban after many years of fighting this unjust policy. That allowed us to finally host the 2012 AIDS conference in Washington, D.C. But unfortunately, You'll also remember that we could not be joined in D.C. by many of our sisters and brothers because of the travel ban for sex workers and people who use drugs. You remember that? You remember that? And let me be clear, this policy is wrong, and I am working to end it. And for each of these barriers, the disparities, stigma, and discrimination, laws and policies, there's a lot of hope there. That hope is you. Each and every one of you represent the bridges we need to overcome these challenges. But we have to fight this together and united. We may always not agree, but this conference and this community has always been a place for dialogue, disagreement, yes, and compromise. It's what makes us unique. It's what makes us resilient. Only together, activists, policymakers, researchers, can we provide equitable and affordable access to treatment for everyone. And in the United States, I have to say this is a political struggle. And we have to elect members of Congress and local officials who get it and who will join us in this fight for justice, because that is what it's about. It's for justice for everyone. We must work together to repeal laws that put human rights and our public health goals at risk. Together, I know that we can bring communities out of the shadows. I know we can do this. Last week marked President Mandela's 100th birthday. And I've been thinking a lot about my first International AIDS Conference with Madiba in Durban. We brought the fight to South Africa in solidarity with our sisters and brothers living under an AIDS denialist government. We didn't shy away then, and we can't shy away now. We can't shy away now. We will not shy away, because Madiba, he taught us that. As long as poverty, injustice, and gross inequality persist in the world wherever it exists, none of us can truly rest. And you have my commitment that I will not rest. And for those of you who know me, you know that. You know that, because we have to honor the legacy of those who came before us, honoring the legacy of President Mandela with your work. And so I encourage you to stay the course. From California, from the Bay Area, of course, my district is the heart and soul of the resistance movement against these horrible policies which you know we're faced with. We are resisting. And I hope you know that we in the Bay Area pledge to you that we don't plan on backing down at all until justice is done. Until justice is done for everyone. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for standing up for everything that is right. And as in my district, my young millennials, they say, thank you for staying woke.